Welcome back to G Fun Facts Online. Today we are diving into the murky, history-laden waters of the Egyptian coast to discuss a discovery that essentially rewrites the textbook on ancient luxury. For centuries, historians and archaeologists have looked at the Ptolemaic dynasty, that final Greek-speaking lineage of pharaohs ending with Cleopatra, as a period of excessive opulence. We have read the ancient texts describing their floating palaces, these massive river barges that were less like boats and more like villas drifting on the Nile. But for a very long time, these descriptions hovered on the edge of myth. We had the words of the geographer Strabo, we had the boasts of Calixenus of Rhodes, but we did not have the wood. We lacked the physical proof that these decadent vessels were anything more than literary exaggeration or Orientalist fantasy. That changed this week, in a revelation that fundamentally alters our understanding of maritime engineering in the ancient world. The European Institute for Underwater Archaeology, known as IEASM, and led by the legendary Frank Gaudio, announced the excavation of a remarkably preserved shipwreck off the submerged island of Antirhodos in Alexandria's eastern harbor. This is not a warship. It is not a merchant freighter designed to haul grain to Rome. Preliminary analysis confirms that this vessel is a thalamagos. That is a Greek term translating to cabin carrier or room carrier. It is a pleasure barge dating to the early Roman period, and it is the physical manifestation of a lifestyle that has captivated the Western imagination for 2,000 years. To understand the magnitude of this find, we have to look at where it was found. The wreck was discovered in the Portus Magnus, the great harbor of ancient Alexandria. This is a site Gaudio's team has been surveying for decades. The topography down there is incredibly complex because the ancient coastline didn't just erode, it collapsed. Massive earthquakes and tidal waves in the 4th and 8th centuries AD sent the royal quarters, including the entire island of Antirhodos, tumbling into the sea. The wreck lies buried under meters of protective sediment, just 50 meters from the site of the Temple of Isis. This proximity to the temple is the first major clue to its identity, which we will get to in a moment. But first, let's talk about the ship itself, because the naval architecture here tells a fascinating story of engineering intent. The vessel is preserved by the anaerobic conditions of the harbor clay, meaning there is no oxygen down there to fuel the bacteria that usually eat wood. It measures approximately 28 meters in surviving length, with an estimated original length of 35 meters. The beam, or the width, is 7 meters. Now 35 meters might sound small compared to a modern mega yacht, but in the context of ancient riverine navigation, this was a significant craft. What has electrified the archaeological community is not just the size, but the shape. If you look at sea-going vessels of this period, Roman grain ships or triremes, they feature deep keels and rounded hulls designed to cut through the waves of the Mediterranean. This barge is emphatically flat-bottomed. The hull features what naval architects call a hard chine. This is a sharp angle where the bottom meets the sides at the bow, which then transitions to a softer rounded turn at the stern. This specific architecture is not accidental. It is a solution to a specific geographic problem. A flat bottom provides two distinct advantages for the environment of the Nile Delta. First, it creates a shallow draft. This allowed the vessel to navigate the shallow, silt-laden canals that connected Alexandria to the Nile and the sanctuary city of Canopus. These weren't deep ocean waters. They were calm, marshy highways. Second, and perhaps more importantly for a pleasure barge, a flat bottom creates a massive, stable platform. It minimizes the rolling motion caused by passengers moving around. This was a ship designed not for speed, but for stillness. It was a floating stage for dining, sleeping, and ritual. The structural timbers are robust, yet the team found no evidence of a mast step. This means the ship had no sail. It relied entirely on oars or towing. Gaudio's team estimates it would have required 20 to 24 rowers to propel the barge. Given the layout, these rowers were likely slave labor, hidden away on a lower level or rowing from outriggers, ensuring that the guests on the main deck remained undisturbed by the sweat and noise of propulsion. This discovery forces us to return to the library, specifically to the work of the Greek geographer Strabo. Strabo visited Egypt around 25 BC, shortly after the fall of Cleopatra and the annexation of Egypt by Rome. In his geography, specifically Book 17, he offers a vivid, almost voyeuristic account of the lifestyle along the canal that linked Alexandria to Canopus. He wrote, and I am paraphrasing here, that the canal was filled with people playing the flute and dancing without restraint with extreme licentiousness, both men and women. He specifically mentions that they held feasts in cabin boats, or thalamagoi, which would enter the thick of the lotus plants and the shade of the leaves. For centuries, scholars debated what Strabo meant by thalamagoi. Were they just small skiffs with little awnings? Or were they substantial architectural structures? The Antirhodos wreck gives us the answer. The beam of 7 meters is exceptionally wide for a ship of this length. That 5-to-1 length-to-width ratio is terrible for speed, but it is perfect for architecture. It confirms that the vessel was built to support a thalamus, a large, heavy central pavilion or deckhouse. This validates Strabo's eye for detail. This was not a boat you sat in, it was a boat you lived on. The flat hull allowed the ship to glide through the thick vegetation of the marshes without snagging a keel, while the wide deck provided the square footage necessary for the feasts Strabo described with such Roman puritanism. But we need to place this ship in its proper timeline. The Antirhodos barge is a modest successor to the Leviathans of the earlier Ptolemaic era. The most famous of these was the thalamagos of Ptolemy IV Philopator, who ruled from 221 to 204 BC. That ship was a catamaran monstrosity that was reportedly half a stadium long, or about 90 meters. Ancient texts describe it as having a dining hall for 20 couches made of cedar and cypress, a sleeping suite for the king and queen, a shrine to Aphrodite, and columns made of real marble. While the newly discovered wreck is smaller than Philopator's giant, it represents the persistence of this distinct naval tradition into the Roman era. Graffiti found on the central carling, or keelson, of the Antirhodos wreck is written in Greek, the lingua franca of the Eastern Mediterranean, and dates the vessel to the first half of the 1st century AD. This places the ship in the reign of emperors like Tiberius, Caligula, or Claudius. This timing is crucial. It suggests that even after the fall of Cleopatra, the Roman governors and the surviving Alexandrian elite continued the Ptolemaic tradition of riverine luxury. They adopted the thalamagos lifestyle, cruising the canopic branch of the Nile, perhaps imitating the very queens they had conquered. The boat is a hybrid artifact. It was built for an Egyptian environment, labeled in the Greek language, and used during the Roman era. Now, while the temptation is to view this vessel solely as a party barge for drunken revelries, Frank Gaudio has proposed a more solemn possibility. Remember, the ship was found in the shadow of the Temple of Isis. In the 1st century AD, the cult of Isis was exploding in popularity across the Roman world. One of the central festivals of this cult was the Navigium Isidis, or the Vessel of Isis, an annual maritime procession that marked the opening of the sailing season. During this festival, a magnificent, ritually purified ship was launched from the harbor, laden with votive offerings. The specific features of the Antirhodos barge align perfectly with the ritual function. The wide deck would have been perfect for a procession of priests, musicians, and the display of sacred statuary. The slow speed fits a ritual procession, which requires a stately measured pace, achievable only by a barge designed for stability over velocity. Its proximity to the Isis sanctuary suggests it may have been the property of the temple, used to transport the high priesthood or the idol of the goddess herself during the journey to Canopus. If this theory holds, the feasts Strabo described might have been the secular side of a religious coin, the public revelry accompanying a sacred voyage. So how did this magnificent vessel meet its end? It does not appear to have been scuttled or slowly abandoned. The timbers are well preserved, and the context suggests a sudden event. Archaeologists point to a massive seismic event that struck Alexandria around 50 AD. This earthquake, and the likely accompanying tsunami, is believed to be responsible for the destruction of the Temple of Isis on Antirhodos and the initial subsidence of the eastern port. The scenario is cinematic in its tragedy. The barge, perhaps moored at the temple quay or preparing for a festival, was caught in the violent churning of the harbor waters. The flat-bottomed hull, so stable in calm water, would have been helpless against a tsunami or the liquefaction of the harbor floor. It was swamped, smashed, or simply dragged down as the island itself gave way, settling into the silt that would embrace it for 2,000 years. The significance of this find cannot be overstated. It serves as a verification of textual sources. Archaeology often struggles to align physical finds with historical texts, but here the alignment is near perfect. The hull form explains the cabin boat terminology used by ancient writers. We no longer have to guess how they navigated the shallow lakes. We have the engineering blueprint. Furthermore, it gives us insight into the concept of the hydro city. We often think of ancient cities as land masses bordered by water. Alexandria was different. It was a Venice of the south, where water was the primary medium of social and royal life. This barge demonstrates that the harbor and canals were not just for transport, but were habitable spaces, extensions of the urban fabric. Finally, there is the link to Emperor Caligula. Historians have long suspected that Caligula's famous Nemi ships, those massive floating palaces recovered in Italy in the 1930s, were inspired by his obsession with Egyptian kingship and the Ptolemaic court. The Antirhodos barge provides the missing link. It shows the type of vessel Caligula would have seen or heard about, the Egyptian prototype that inspired his Roman megalomania. As divers continue to document the timbers of the Antirhodos barge, we are granted a rare intimacy with the ancient world. We can imagine the slap of water against the flat hull, the smell of incense drifting from the central pavilion, and the sound of flutes echoing off the stone embankments of the Portus Magnus. For centuries, the floating palaces of Alexandria were dismissed as exaggerations. Today, resting on the harbor floor, the wood speaks the truth. They were real, they were magnificent, and they were the stage upon which the drama of the ancient world was played out.